character design is not really my thing. At least, I don't think I've been able to make any characters with iconic designs. In the past, I'd usually start doodling all these in my sketchbook and just slap some clothes to them. I usually already have a mental image of them, but actually putting them on paper, I had to draw the actual clothes and actual hair, and that's hard. So, this is to say that in terms of character design, I've never followed a process and usually would wing it during the drawing phase. To be honest, the idea of designing a character kind of scared me. I don't feel like I'm creative enough for it, and any designs that I would do will be boring. But as with anything in art, it is a muscle that must be flexed, so I wanted to give it a go. I chose an OC for this, so how did I choose him? Well, a while back, I decided to work on shorter stories after stepping away from a larger writing project. I won't go into that here, but I might cover it in future videos. But basically, I chose a character from that larger project and decided to do a short story about his backstory, if that makes sense. And I had a lot of fun doing it. That character's name is Inskra. I haven't finished editing that first story because procrastination. But he was a small child during that first story. I couldn't get him out of my head, and I soon started thinking about his future and his older self. Then I started writing a novella instead of a second short story. But that gave me the push I needed to give structured character design a go. So, how did I go about it? Well, first, I wanted to gather some reference photos and inspirations, so I paid a visit to the Shrine for Creative People, Pinterest. I already had a few ideas of what I wanted for this character. Since I had already written about him, I already know who he is as a person. But I guess you can always start by asking yourself, what is the first word that comes to mind with this character? What do they do? Where do they live? What are their goals? In this case, Inskra is part of a nomadic people who live in the cold tundras during warmer seasons but move south to snowy forests during winters. That meant that Inskra would need to be wearing clothes appropriate for the cold. So I first thought of winter clothes. Since those keywords gave me modern clothing results, I had to modify my search and started getting photos of what I was really looking for. Basically, a few concepts were reoccurring. Inuit people, Siberian people, Tibetan people, and the water tribe from Avatar. And the last one really makes sense because they're based on the Inuit and the designs are pretty recognizable. Making sure to look at a wide variety of photos not only gives you ideas for designs, but they also make sure you wonder why the people wore the things they wore. I started seeing the different cuts and details on the clothes, and I added several of those images to a board like crazy. But once I thought I had enough, I decided to go for something more background related. The first story starts in a snowy beach when Inskra is about 5 years old. While the design will be for an older Inskra here during the winter, I wanted to reference that first story. I searched for Arctic Beach and I was like, why does that word look wrong? Until I realized I was missing a C. Anyways, I grabbed a photo that best suited what I was looking for, and I also added some snowy forests and photos of the Aurora Borealis. I finished this by doing a subboard with the main photos I wanted to keep in mind. I was ready to start sketching. I set up a white canvas on ClipStudio because it felt more natural for this. I copied and pasted the Pinterest images there in order to start working. Character designs usually sit between two edges of a spectrum, practicality versus aesthetic. The former being focused solely on functionality and the latter on how cool it looks, wearability be damned. Each has their own place in my opinion, but I do find it frustrating when designs are way too impractical for no reason. Especially women's designs, but let's not get into that here. So I do have a bias for practicality. But 100% practicality with nothing else can be boring, so I do try to keep that in mind. I decided to start out by doing some doodles with no details or clothes. I wanted to capture Inskra's body language and movement. He is a fighter, but he is small and quick on his feet. However, he often lurks about in the shadows rather than facing something head-on. That would make him more of an assassin type of character rather than a warrior. I think the one that captured this the best would be the one that is supposed to be him lurking behind a tree. I know some artists write out certain words and phrases to guide their designs. I would say that I didn't because I already wrote his story, but I just forgot. I was going to do it, but I just slipped away. I think it's a great idea, and even if I didn't write anything down, I think I was being guided by the following words: flowing, quick, burst, wild, mystical, and fire. So with these ideas guiding me, I moved on to the next step. I did a small body to quickly sketch out clothes on top. I suggest pointing out how many heads tall your character is going to be to make them easier to draw. You could do some body type sketches at this point, but since I already knew what he looked like, I made that call based on the world lore and his purpose. But this is always something that I see a lot of artists playing around with. So if you're not constrained by something like this, you can always try different body type variations. Inskra is overall slender and short. His people tend to be on the smaller side compared to other people in his world, so he's of average size for his age. He's supposed to be around 15 to 17 years old, but I still haven't settled on this. Now, I know that people around this age range will claim that 17 and 15 are clearly different, and it's definitely true, especially for even younger ages, but for this story it's basically the same. Or maybe I'm just old, I don't know. Anyways, I did the body sketch with 5 heads high as a base. I copied and pasted it several times to start sketching out the clothes. I started with the first design, focusing on heavier clothing and thick boots. I really like chunky boots, so I wanted to add some here. But this looks like a very stereotypical design. I don't have any problem with it, and I probably would have settled on this one. But it's always a good idea to push through and try different ideas before settling on a final one. I then tried slimmer fit with a different neck. I really like chunky fur around the neck, so I tried doing 2 designs like this. One that would be chunky at the top only, and another chunky all around. I was designing his outfit for the winter period, meaning that he wouldn't be out in the tundra. He'd need a lighter, less fluffier outfit as he'd be out in a forest. So chunky boots and fluffy colors were out of the question. And there was also the assassin angle. The first 2 didn't look like one, and the latter 2 designs look kind of Viking-esque. The design needed to be slimmer and accommodate stealth and speed. I also needed to keep in mind mobility, so a very tight outfit was also not a good idea. I decided to remove the fluffy hoodie and rule out the chunky boots. Instead, he'd have a slimmer silhouette at the feet. I gave him this skirt-like thing, I don't know what it's called, for protection against the elements, and baggy pants for mobility. I also wanted to add some wood pieces to the shoes for extra protection, and I realized that some of these designs are very ninja-like. I mean, it makes sense since I'm going for assassin, but I didn't want a literal ninja. I tried doing a longer coat with no belt, but I really like the belt dividing the design. So I went back to that, did a longer skirt thingy with a cross collar. It still reads a bit ninja-y, but I think the fur lining and the embroidery is what'll set it apart. And by this point you probably realize that I chose the last design. That's pretty interesting since I thought I'd be pretty much doing the one I started out with. I now have the final design, but it's a small sketch. So it's time to draw a large, right? But I had a fun idea in my mind. I wanted to draw little Inskra as he was in the first story versus his older self. I started out marking out how many heads height he'd be, so I chose 3 since he was small. I chose thick, fluffy clothes for his child design because, well, it's a small child. Gotta wrap them up so they don't get sick, right? I then made the head smaller because he looked too much like a potato. I mean, he's still a potato, but not such a tiny potato. I wanted to convey curiosity and innocence here, but I also wanted to add a bit of naughtiness with his expression. So I tried doing that smile kids always do when they've done something they shouldn't have, or are about to run off to God knows where at the speed of Sonic the Hedgehog. Once I was happy at how he looked, look at those chubby cheeks, I started with teenage Inskra. My brain told me to draw him with a serious face well, he's been through things. And some of those things happened to him when he was still this potato. But I thought it would be more interesting if I drew him smiling to compare him to his child self. I drew him using 5 heads as a base, doing a slim body. As I was doing the pants, I realized that the skirt thing made his pants not that visible anymore, so I made them bigger at the knees, leaning back on the ninja design again. but with all of the details added in, I don't think it reads as ninja anymore. And then I left the face and the hair for last. To be honest, I was scared that I wouldn't get this right. I already have a mental image of what he's supposed to look like, and part of me was afraid to mess it up. But I come so far to give up, so I bit the bullet. I started with his hair because I was less nervous about it. I wanted something wild, almost like a flame. While his hair is black, I wanted it to look like the arms of a fire, if that makes sense. I wanted it on the shorter side, pulled back. But I had to be careful so that it didn't look like he used tons of hair gel. So I added chunks of hair around his face and sticking up from his head. Looking back on this, I think I was inspired by Musashi's earlier designs in Vagabond, where his hair is all over the place. Once I was happy with that, I moved over to his face. And I had to tread carefully. I started with his mouth and nose and then moved on to the eyes. His eyes were meant to be sharp and kind of cat-like. After all, cats are quick and stealthy, right? They also fit the words that I chose for Inskra. His face is supposed to be round as well as his nose. The people of this region have dark hair, dark eyes, and round faces, so this is just a reflection of his heritage. I had to work on the eyes a bit because I wasn't liking them. I've recently been feeling like I need to study eyes because I'm just not convinced with the way I do them right now. But once I had something good enough, I left them as is. Do the characters look similar next to each other? After that was done, I wanted to do several heads for expressions, and I'll be honest here, I had already spent a while on this process, so I was tired. I could do the heads from scratch, but I would spend a while more making them look just right. I didn't have the energy anymore and I was mainly focusing on expressions and design. So I pulled out a 3D head model from ClipStudio, picking one that was close to what I was looking for. I traced the general shapes and adapted the eyes. Once the structure was there, I started working. The frontal face was originally intended to have a surprise look, but I chose a neutral look instead for reference purposes. This is when I started to question my choices so far because the hair was hard. It was pulled back but messy at the same time, so I had a hard time getting it right without the drawing becoming messy itself. I didn't love the eyes, but I thought they worked well enough, so I moved on to the next head. This one was more of a determined look, pretty straightforward in regards to expression. The hair again was a struggle. I started out with several chunks and started building up the base. I think this is where I actually started to understand how it worked. With the next head, I wanted a more playful look. I was starting to get a more of a hold on his features and hair by now. This is also the first time where it's clear that he has an expansion in his ear. It's meant to look more like a thorn than a claw. This is a cultural thing where the men of his tribe wear one on their left lobe while the women wear one on the right. The last head was a profile and I think it's my favorite. The hair was looking more defined and intentional and more like I had originally intended. By this point, I was tired, but I wanted to play around with some small poses now with the clothes. These are obviously not great drawings, they're not even anatomically correct, but they're not supposed to be. They're almost like thumbnails for compositions. But I decided to stop at 3 of them because I had been drawing for 4.5 hours by then. My wrist hurt and I hadn't eaten anything. The time just flew by, but it was really fun. I didn't add color here because I mainly work in black and white and I had spent too much time on this already. But color is not out of the question, I may add it in the future. I originally wanted to do a full black and white illustration for this video as well, but it took longer than I thought. I do want to do one though and talk more about Inskra and the novella I did about him, so I'll do that in the next video. But hopefully you find this helpful or at least entertaining. It was certainly fun for me. I don't draw my OCs as often as I like, so this is a good incentive to draw Inskra. How about you? How often do you draw your OCs? What do you think of Inskra's designs? What is your process or what do you suggest? Drop your comments down below and please keep an eye out for the next video. Thank you for watching!